welcome to this episode of the Skift Meetings Podcast, the podcast for curious event professionals. In this episode titled How to Make a Bad Conference Good, Skift Meetings Executive Editor Andrea Doyle speaks with Skift CEO Rafat Ali and Skift's Head of Event Programming, Quinn, discussing the current state of conferences. This episode was prompted by Rafat's recent LinkedIn post expressing his dismay about the quality of conferences. The discussion revolves around the importance of industry experts on stage versus TV personalities or celebrities. It covers the dreaded 5 or 6 person panel, the importance of networking, and how content must always be a focus. I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation, and I invite you to check out the other episodes of the Skift Meetings Podcast with tips and insights from today's most influential event professionals. You can find all the episodes on our website or by subscribing through your favorite podcast service.
Hi there, I'm Andrea Doyle, Executive Editor of Skift Meetings, and I'm here with Ryan and Rafat from Skift. And a few weeks ago, Rafat posted on LinkedIn a piece about how conferences are failing their attendees and speakers, and it created quite a furor on LinkedIn. So we wanted to talk about why the reaction was what it was, and how conferences are failing attendees, and why isn't content more of a focus. So Rafat, can you explain to us a bit about why you posted this?
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. And I'm a huge admirer of Andrea and the team that focuses on the meetings industry. And if you haven't checked out Skift Meetings, you should definitely do it at meetings.skift.com. And they're covering business events and the next reinvention and transformation and all the issues in the meetings and events industry. So, and my post actually had nothing to do with what their work is. It just so happens that we're also owners of conferences ourselves. And this is my second company. First company, we used to do conferences as well. So I've been doing conferences for 20 years at this point. So we've seen everything. We obviously attend conferences ourselves. We speak at conferences. We attend trade shows. Every format of business event we have been at and have seen it up close from sort of dual eyes, one as organizers ourselves, and two as somebody who, as a media company, we cover the industry itself. And so, and to be clear, my comment was specifically on conferences as an editorial-led, so programming-led events versus the other types of trade shows or other types of events that have no programming component to it. As you know, many of them don't. And so there's been a lot of talk and coverage and progress in the events industry, and Skift Meetings has covered it over the years on the festivalization of the events industry, and two, bringing in, and the related part, which is bringing in experiential components to a conference, because conferences and events, because people that are attending are now expect a lot more out of these events, both in terms of experience as well as in terms of ROI of their time. Even if they're not, actually invested in as a sponsor, they want an ROI on their time. And so a lot of progress has been made, which is how to create more experiential spaces, how to technology has come in and managing a lot of the process, registration and check-in, etc., becoming it more seamless. All of that has happened and gets adopted by industry in different ways. Where the events industry is not a monolith, but let's just continue on that path, has not innovated, generally speaking, is on-stage programming. And the general consensus that you hear from everybody is that nobody goes to conferences for the on-stage. They go to conferences for networking. To which, anytime that happens in a consensus way, my first reaction is, okay, so why is that? Like, why can't we question the consensus? And us as a journalistic organization, this was true for my previous company, it's true for Skift even more so, is that for us, our conferences are a journalistic exercise. It is talking to people in the industry, not necessarily to get news out of them like newsy news, but to get insights out of them that you wouldn't hear anywhere else. and in a different format than even our stories, for instance, or podcast like we're doing now. Um, and so that's what we've been focused on since year one when we launched in 2014 the Skift Global Forum. And now that we've had 10 years of experience doing all types of events, including virtual events and COVID and since and Skift Meetings particularly does virtual events well. And so it was a frustration. This is I'm giving you the preamble and now coming to the actual point of the post. Frustration with a couple of events that I recently spoke at will be unnamed here that did a great job of logistics. So like Rafat, you're landing this like this is all automated. So me getting texts or emails on here's the time you have to be here. Here's the limo that's going to pick you up at the airport, and it's arriving now. Like these are all real time updates I'm getting. This is a particular conference that I'm giving an example of, but I'm not going to name it. They did everything right except work with me on the presentation itself. Nobody
Which
gave,
is the most important.
which is why I'm there, which is why I'm taking out my time, which is why they're inviting me, which is why the audience is giving their time. Um, and so, and this is not a outlier. This happens more often than not. Like they're very particular about send the presentation. Please send the presentation 3 weeks before. One that never happens and shouldn't happen. And why should that be 3 weeks before? That's a whole different conversation. Maybe Brian, you can elaborate on that part. Okay, like they'll hound you to like, oh, please get the presentation. It's late and they have to. And I send the presentation in silence. No hand holding, no sense of who the audience is, no sense of what the stage will be, like what is effect you are looking out, you're looking out of the speaker. So everything that you would assume should happen to make a quality experience doesn't happen except for the logistics. And at this particular conference, all of that was true, but also like they were so particular about timing. And then when I get there and I'm waiting there and like the conference is half an hour late. And so just to so that so no wonder that if you're not giving the speaker a good experience, why would the audience get a good experience if you're not getting the speaker a good experience? And so it was a it was a mix of these types of experiences that sort of came out in this post that resonated, the one that you wrote about.
And that's what I think makes Skift Global Forum stand out and Skift's other conferences is that the focus is on the content on stage. But that comes with a lot of preparation. So Brian, why don't you touch upon that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and it's so interesting because I think Rafat's post, okay, sure, it's a lot of like discontent or frustration with conferences, but it's really just important reminders on how you have to be a great editor, and perhaps the journalism background we have is really about the thing we understand is the importance of editing, and we focus on the content. I don't know if people you could imagine some events feel like the content will just take care of itself, but that attention to detail. We just got off a call with our moderators, um, many of them pros, but we remind them all really about the fundamentals for leading a conversation in this high level provocative way, and the preparation, the amount of rehearsal that takes. And so when you look at Rafat's post, because it's interesting, is if we're yes, we can kind of complain that it's still like here we are, 2024, and yes, the events sort of took a hit, and we kind of forgot a lot of these things in the pandemic, or we had a big focus on virtual events, but now we're fully back. I mean, events are we can't even book venues because there's so much compression, and so it's amazing that we're still having to remind uh, ourselves or certain events or things we go to, and attendees are certainly more scrupulous about this. Am I going to go to an event, and is it going to be worth my time? Because time is so much more important post pandemic. That at the end of the day, you could get all of the lighting, the logistics, the design, all of that right. But if the conversation just sucks on stage, it's going to be the main thing, the piece that people remember that just I was falling asleep. And so I don't know if it gets talked about enough. I think people understand events like TED that are incredible at delivering. Um, this content, and obviously they do a lot with it in post, and the videos, are shared. But um, I think there are many ways you can invoke those tools, even for just a small gathering, a small salon of 20 people. It's still, these fundamental truths are there about what's the conversation, how are we, of course, making the content as relevant and timely and exciting as possible. There's a mix of both education and entertainment that happens on stage, and so we listen to all these things. And the fun part about Skift events is that um, we are constantly trying to hone and sharpen that. And there is never a sort of resting back on our laurels of saying, oh, it's fine. We have to continually work at it. And so I think that's the one thing hopefully, event producers and programmers can take more, time to do. So.
By the way, you've noticed in the post, and I think Brian, you and I talked about this separately. Um, Not once did I mention Skift events because it wasn't meant to be like a promo of like, oh, this is bad and what we do is good. It's implicit, I'm sure, but I didn't necessarily talk. I talked about it from a speaker experience,
Mhm.
and it's
Right.
interesting. People talk a lot about attendee experience, but they don't talk about speaker experience, which is even less talked about.
Mhm.
And 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 for us, it's like you're getting all these big name speakers to give their time. If you give them a good time, not only will they be good on stage, it will probably bring benefits to my business long term. To
Mhm.
be good, to give them a good experience, they will come back. Um, so, um, so all of that. Going back to TED, the thing, maybe you know this, Brian, and maybe you know this, Andrea. I don't fully know this. The conference, the main TED. This is not the TEDx part, but the main TED that happens. That fifth, what is it? Minutes? How many minutes is the exact skip TED talk?
I thought it's like 18, maybe 20, but yeah.
Whatever minutes it is. There are 1,800 minutes of preparation behind that. So TED has an army of people that work with the presenter to prepare them. So the end result is only whatever 15, 18 minutes, whatever it is. It's the it's the tens or hundreds of hours of preparation with each speaker that happens that has led to TED being this iconic and this format essentially being synonymous with TED. Not that a person speaking on stage was not a known thing. It's been happening since conferences has been happening in history. And, or, I mean, human existence. This is what kings used to do back in the days, like stand on stage and talk, or whatever the stage was back in those days. And so it's not a new format. The other interesting thing that's happening is now TED is now, was it how many years it was? It was like a milestone number for TED, 25 years, something like that. I forget exactly what the milestone number for TED is, but they just came out with Chris Anderson, who now heads the organization along with with our friend Monique, and so they are adding new formats in the next phase of TED, which has never happened before. So they're experimenting beyond the one person on stage giving this presentation to adding Q&A. There was a podcast that Chris and Monique did. I'm going to say a month ago. That's on the TED YouTube page, and I'm sure their website too. On what new formats they're thinking about, because they think that this new world. I mean, he gave a more sort of exalted explanation on because that's how he talks on these new formats and why it's the right time for these new formats. But for us, Brian, you can talk about like how we think about formats, and I don't think we've, as you said, we haven't gotten there fully because we keep thinking about new ways of doing this.
It's hard to get past the interview because it's the one-on-one interview, and I love that Ted's expanding into that. And we've seen them do that. I know that Elon Musk, when they had him for however long, that was a long conversation. It had to be an interview. Um, but I like that also as kind of a responsive, maybe it's indicative of quality of content, especially in our world now where AI is becoming, mediocrity is very cheap. You can get lots of mediocrity through AI. And so I don't know if it's like, what's the reasoning? Are they running out of people that can give provocative solos? Probably not. But they also, probably most of it is they recognize the power of their ability to channel the conversation and those ideas. And this is what we do with Skift is, even if we have a global CEO, it's not, there's nothing left to chance with that, where we really have to, we think about, even, yes, they have wonderful ideas, but our job is to shepherd that conversation, not just for the speaker, but for the audience. And we're taking the audience along for the ride, and we're making sure the speaker's ideas are best honed. So I'm excited. All that to say, I'm excited to see where that format goes with other creative formats. Yeah, I think the fundamental, like, what is. I guess this gets into like how conferences try to get kitschy or splashy or come up with these unique ideas, and you really have to uh, ask yourself.
It's a fine it's a
Yeah,
fine line between being kitschy and sort of stoking the ego of the organizer, which
yeah.
happens way more than you would expect, versus coming up with new formats. So we've experimented with debate formats on stage, obviously panels, and we have, again, we can have the dreaded panel conversation, which is that, and I call it a manel, which is like six males sitting on a,
Even worse.
and it still happens in many industries, in even in our industry, in the travel industry, um, even in meetings industries, that in meeting conferences about the meetings industry, it happens still.
Mm.
I'm not just talking US, I'm talking on a global level, where there may not be that much, maybe there's some less awareness on why that's important. And so we shy away from panels. We do panels, but they're short. I guess that's the word. Meaning we don't have enough. Like at max, we'll have is like two people on a panel moderated by one of our editors. I know in India we had like three, but there's three startups, and they were there for a reason. Three startups together, moderated by one of our journalists.
Well, it's all about intention. I think the conversation you're trying to lead and the narrative you're putting out on stage, having a really um, well thought out intention of what each voice provides. Um, the panel, the problem with panels is it's lazy for many, in many applications. You could say for any global event, like there could be many examples of just, we have this critical mass of people and we brought them together because it looks good to have their faces on the website. Of course, inclusivity sometimes or usually gets left by the wayside as well. Occasionally, you'll get something that's a very diverse set of group of people, but then the moderator will get on, and it's very scattershot in terms of how they're directing questions. And the first speaker gets a question, the last one kind of just repeats what the first one says, and it's a nightmare. And so this is where the choreography really comes together, and what we really think about very proactively. We not only set expectations with those on stage, making sure that anyone sitting in a chair has well thought out um, uh, what they're going to say. Now, we never want a canned response. We don't send exact questions, because not only because we're a journalistic organization, but because um, it's boring. If somebody gives their response that they've just practiced many times, nobody wants to hear that. We want to hear kind of real, candid conversations. But we do give them some topics to say, here's what to think about, and make your answers brief. Um, and then the coursing, it really, yeah, the moderator is the hot seat, and that's the coursing of that discussion. They should be the conductor. Um, I don't know if many organizations think about it in this very proactive way: set expectations, have a clear intention, remind the audience where you are, provide them with signposts throughout saying, like, okay, we discussed, growth. Now we're going to move on to, your core business, or whatever, some kind of other discussion.
But that we've talked about this in the past when we talk about our conferences, the story arc on the day, for instance. So
Yeah.
there's a reason why we put this session after that session, or this part of the day has this programming. So talk about that part.
Yeah, I think in creating a well-rounded, there's a few different kind of levels to zoom in. There's the macro entire view of the entire day of, like, or several days of saying, what are the big kind of questions we're answering? And probably when this has been most effective, our event in India seemed to really resonate well. We kind of had three core areas, more or less, being the domestic market, the inbound market, and the outbound. Um, and that really, it's so interesting, the power of threes. And I know it's kind of silly, but I do it's just, for me, it's something that I like with audiences because it's digestible and you can remember it. Um, and take them along for the ride. We rarely set expectations with the audience and remind them where we are and give them that comfort of saying, okay, we're here in the discussion. The morning, we're going to have some big high level CEO conversations and then get into more tactical. The afternoon, we have to be advised of, be we can't get boring. People are just tired, and so if you start doing things that loses the audience, you have to be really aware of that. So there's a bit of variance that we build in and keeping the energy up. All of these things have an intention, and yes, it is a little bit of instinct as you go through, and it's always different. But there's that macro level of the entire day through the different sort of segments of blocks. There's different ways in which we could look at each individual, let's say an hour and a half chunk of conversation before we have a break or a lunch. And then obviously there's more granular levels of within each discussion. How are we being of service to that larger narrative, taking the audience with us? And then the one thing we've experimented with but haven't always done is the ability for an MC to get on stage and level set and tell people where we are. And we've both done it and not done it. And um, I think we depending on the event.
The pros and cons of we learned that there are pros and cons of
Yeah.
having an MC.
Yeah.
If I'm at the conference, which I'm at most of the Skift conferences, I consider myself the host, but that just means I am the one welcoming you into my house type person, not necessarily on stage. This is true for all across the venue. Like I'm the one that I want to feel that I'm the one that is welcoming people into our home. And we really do, like I really do think of our conferences as welcoming people into our home. And that's why we think of everything, including like people walking in, what's going to be the check-in, like every part of it. Which is also why this is the last point, and then I'm sure Andrea have other questions, but on stage, like sometimes people say, like people assume that we're going to have like a cage fight on stage. And we're actually not trying to get into a cage fight on stage. This sounds counterintuitive to people as a journalistic organization. One of the things I do want to say is that if we're inviting people into our home, we don't want to piss in their ear. Like this is a translation of a Hindi saying from India of like, you invited me to your house and now you're pissing into my ear. Like we don't want that to happen. So point being that you want insights out of people. You don't want them to be you don't want to make them look bad at the end of the day. And so we'll ask the tough questions, but we'll ask it in a respectful way, and we'll have a respectful back and forth, and also take the feedback that they're giving us and then build on it versus like an adversarial relationship.
Right.
So just so that nobody assumes that we're having an agenda, which is why when sometimes the audience comes to like, you didn't ask hard enough questions. And I said, like, look, we try. Sometimes we're able to, sometimes we're not able to. And then sometimes like, it's not a cage fight. Like in India, they really want you to, because they're so influenced by how acrimonious the TV culture is there, like the whole TV news culture there is. This is a whole different tangent, but it also depends on audience expectations and on what they're expecting. In US, more than not, they're actually expecting insights and that they can take away and help build their business. And so, yeah.
And that's what we hear from many people in the meetings industry, how important it is to get the expectations of the audience and take that and plan from there instead of creating an event that you think the audience is going to want. And something else you said really struck a chord with me, how you've tested having an MC and how you're truly the host. But so many conferences get celebrities or retired news anchors to get up on stage, and they are the MC and they are the host. And most often it's a miss. And study after study shows that attendees want to hear from industry experts, not motivational speakers or celebrities.
Well, unless it's a conference about motivational speakers and celebrities, like that's a different. Like if it's just a conference on them,
Right. Right.
sure. I mean, this is also one of my pet peeves which I mentioned in the article, and Brian and I have talked about it for years. Is that not that I think being paid for speaking, and we get paid for speaking at commercial conferences, so I don't think there's anything wrong with that part. It's that I don't get paid to speak at a dental conference because, like, why would they care? Um, so, like, um, an unnamed conference got Kevin Spacey before the scandal came out about him, and in the travel industry, and like literally, he sat on stage and said, like, "Why am I here again?" And so, and which has and like, people and they say like why, and obviously the former presidents, etc., they get a lot of money on a speaking circuit, etc. um, and so uh, they're two related but somewhat different issues. One is the moderators that industry conferences are obsessed with. This is particularly true in international conferences, um, in travel industry, of like either existing BBC or CNN anchors or retired ones. And there's a whole career of retired anchors moderating conferences. This is true for all across the world, by the way. It happens. I know this in India too, just because I know the country well. And where former TV news readers, they call them news readers, not anchors, like they call here anchors. They're called news readers, which is really what they are. And so of them emceeing conferences in the evening or social events, etc., they get paid obviously extra for that. I think it has a space in different types of events, obviously consumer events and award shows, all the the ones we watch on TV, but also the ones that are not on TV. Um, in conferences, more often than not, they're a miss versus a hit. I'm not saying that they're always miss the mark, but unless you're an industry journalist or an industry person who knows how to moderate, etc., it usually comes off as superficial. And this happens a lot more at association conferences. And Andrea, you may know this because you've attended so many of these. It happens a lot at association events versus media events like ours. And
Mm-hmm.
and I think some of it is to, I mean, you may know the reasons more than I do. Some of it is to justify the members of the associations of like, look, we're bringing in all these people, giving us gravitas. So they assume it gives them gravitas.
Right.
I also
And
see it as like I see it as a stopgap measure for not having, like, if you're not a journalistic organization or not used to writing or you know having that kind of content creation in a very thoughtful way, then it becomes the stopgap of saying we have CNN, we have BBC, we have a journalist on here, and they're helping fill that that place within the event. It's almost as uh, not ill thought out, but it's kind of it's the same thing as getting a paid speaker. Like it's a little bit lazy in my opinion. These are kind of these some of these moderators just fly in, fly out, and it kind of creates. You think the conversation is going to be great because obviously they are interviewing people all day long and on television, but it can come off somewhat flippant or just not very there's not much depth to it. But I don't know. That's my perception of when I see that, and it's okay. You accept it, but you just some organizations can't do it. But I would love to ask, like, can they think a little bit better about how to find somebody that has the relationships of the organization, or just somebody that has a stronger point of view? Like, is that the only option?
well, usually it's done to create excitement, help with social media, but study after study shows that's not what attendees want. Attendees want provoking, relevant topics that are going to help them do their business and help them, and they don't want to hear from these people.
Right.
So,
Definitely, it's important to know your audience because yeah, they can those people could actually work great or not depending on your audience. But I
But
think one of the
one of the things I also want to say is that, yes, the paid speakers we criticize that many times these celebrity speakers miss the mark. There is value in bringing in external, non-related industry speakers,
mhm,
but it again needs to be thought through of why we're bringing in. For instance, in the past, what we have done is sort of bring in speakers from the food and beverage sector, so like restaurants, etc., because they're a related industry. They're parallel to the travel industry. In fact, a lot of the business for the F&B industry happens in the travel industry. So we've had even before, we used to have a restaurant vertical that we used to cover, but even before we started that, which lasted a while, and then we shut it down because it didn't work. But even before we started that, we had Danny Meyer and Rene Redzepi, who's famous as one of the most famous chefs in the world with Noma. We brought them in not so much to talk about travel per se, but to talk about hospitality and what is it to create experiences. Obviously, this is all very relevant to the travel industry, and nobody can say like we brought in a famous doctor. Like, what is that going to do to the travel industry? And so we brought in related speakers. We also bring in fashion. It was one year, I forget what the CEO of some famous fashion brand and retailers. Again, these are all parallel industries to travel that have lessons. None of them are paid speakers, by the way. Actually, one of the chef was, but chefs are used to getting paid to come to conferences, so that's a whole different discussion. But other than that, these are all people that are coming to share knowledge of lessons they've learned in their industry that are applicable to this industry. So I think in this case, and sometimes it doesn't work, but most of the times if you do it well, it does work.
But that's key. You're not afraid to take risks. And many conferences just do the same old, same old. And so many people were optimistic that that was going to change after the pandemic. But in many cases, they're just doing what they've done for years and years and years. So
Well,
by bringing in different voices, it adds more perspective.
I'm going to ask you this question, Andrea, because you are the industry expert. You've been covering this industry for a long time. It's like, absent a journalistic organization behind a conference or event like we have, who handles, like, there's a term I think you used in your story maybe called experience design, and like, so who is in charge of experience design in the hierarchy of event professionals, and like
So
where do you think the state of that is today?
so that's the problem. There's not enough people on staff that deal with stuff like that. Logistics become paramount, but then content falls way to the wayside, and that's an issue because then people aren't going to attend your conference year after year. And the other problem is there's not anyone on staff to focus on networking, and survey after survey shows people attend conferences, one of the number one reasons is to network and to meet other people in the audience that could help them on their career journey. But most, they just like put out a fruit and vegetable platter and have some wine and call that a networking event when it's not. So that's another area that's falling short.
There,
Content and networking.
yeah, we are, fair to say, we are still on our journey of how to get better at connecting people with each other. I don't think we are not there at all, and I don't think we would pretend to say that we're the best networking events in the planet because we lean so heavily into the programming part. I do think that technology has helped, but it also gives in to Brian's previous point, it's a lazy solution, as in like, oh, but in our app we have the matchmaking thing, and
Right. Right.
which, as you know, they say it's driven by AI, whatever. As you know, none of that is like really true, and these are pretty basic things. Um, in almost all cases that I've seen, building a community around an event takes time. It has to
Mhm.
be repeated again and again. There has to be concerted efforts over a long period of time. Our Global Forum, as an example, is now established on the circuit, and there's a whole ecosystem around it that we have no control over. And we don't want any control over, meaning you can't really, beyond a certain point, expect to have full control over a community that you've created, and be okay with that. Like, it took me a while to say, oh, these people are doing these side events that they're not paying us money to do it. Like, what do you mean? And then, and Brian and I have had these conversations. They're like, actually, let them do it. It's actually, it's good. We have to let go as organizers as well on that front.
Yeah, it's always a balance. I think of this often. The idea that often pops into my head is this idea of a permission asset. And we talked about TED earlier, 40 years of TED, whatever it is. they have an enormous permission asset with their audience, meaning the audience comes and they could do anything. Basically, they have permission to do anything they want with that audience. They can experiment. When you talked to Andrea about the idea of fear or taking risks, I think a lot of people have not developed that community basis yet, that sense of trust, really. And that goes back to I think Rafat's point about the treating people like they're a guest in your home, in a restaurant, in an event, in any of these circumstances, in an office, you welcome in for a meeting. This hospitality idea and removing the kind of impersonal and making it, we, in a sense, it is a degree of personalization, that people, making people feel seen who are at this event, and that they are important, and that they are learning things. This is what drives the affinity, the core memory, these things that then they go and tell other people about your event, which of course word of mouth marketing is still a great thing. And so all these factors, I would say, we have not, what we do around networking is not, we don't use a lot of different devices and tools. And that's the thing we haven't really experimented with. But what we do get right is we have an incredible audience who knows each other and knows that and yes, they kind of know what they want to get from each other. So we have not only great people in the room, they feel that sense of welcome. We try to, what we could do more for sure is have more surprise and delight to bring them together, or find ways to say, okay, here's something that totally was an icebreaker that allows me to connect with other people that I would not have otherwise connected with in a 1,000-person room. That's really important. And then also making sure that that events today, rather than the top-down nature, I just heard from Kevin Bacon on stage. What an exciting day! The top-down. I don't know what that provides. Top-down nature of event. There's very little. Even though we focus a lot on like a CEO on stage, and there is of course a top-down nature to that, the real thing is people are always asking, what's in this for me. They want that participatory element, and I think there's a self-interest baked in, and it's on the onus is on the event organizer to think about that and open up ways for those audience members to also feel like they were equally as important, that they were there, and the connections they made. So anyway, all these things are what I think about networking, um, not just that we had an hour with a mixer with some, a bar open, and it's about this larger issue that I think is the holy grail we'd love to see.
One of the things that
And creating community is even more important than just networking.
yeah, and it takes time. I honestly, I think we've learned this, that when people, like, we launch new conferences all the time, it gets harder year 2, year 3, because year 1, a lot of people come to Skift conferences for the novelty of it. So like, oh, it's Skift there. We know that they do great conferences, so they'll come. Year 2 and year 3, to build buzz and programming and community around it, it gets harder. So that means intentionality gets even more important in terms of how you then build from there. And it's easily a 5 to 7 year arc for many of these to become true communities. And New York has become, for us, people come, it's a known thing. It's um, obviously we have to continue to realize that the format doesn't get tired. We continue to think about new things. That's on us. And honestly, we worry about it every day. Like, how do we make sure that our conferences are relevant, particularly in an age where, and this is the elephant in the room that we haven't talked about yet, is when virtual events are easily possible. We could easily just get a speaker on video, and like, how it would be different from getting, like, why should we come to your conferences? For some amount of people, that may be true. Like, they don't come to Skift conferences anymore because they can just watch it online.
I think
But
that intangible of the physical connection or the lure or something, I hope that will still prevail. But you're right. Like you could ask yourself, I could easily get this. I know who's in the room. I don't really care. I don't. The content's not that great, and so you have what is that lure and that hook that you have for your event, that does
And
create that.
and and that's what conference organizers must keep in mind.
Yeah, and that's why, I
And
mean, cliches, like, unless you create I mean, the word experience is a cliche, but it's cliche for a reason. Like, unless you create an experience. And I think that the India event is such a great example because it just happened for us about a month and a half ago, or maybe even just a month and a half ago. But it was also just such an experience for people. They came away, even though it's not like we did, like, quote unquote experiential things. We just did the show that we do, but everything right. And for them, it was such a novelty for a country like India there to see a conference like us, particularly the travel industry. I'm sure there are good conferences in the other industries in India. Just that travel industry hadn't seen this blend of things that we brought together, that it was an experience as a result of it, not because we were trying to create quote unquote experiential conference.
Right. It was in a hotel. It was a conference in a hotel. This wasn't revolutionary. We weren't in a tent, in some kind of sail tent like Cirque du Soleil
It
out in
wasn't.
the field. No, but since I mentioned tangible before, the thing that made it successful, and again, none of this is us tooting our own horn. We are practitioners that think about this every day and question every day and continue to push, But the thing that in the end result, what led that to be memorable is that sense of warmth, that sense of hospitality, the sense of novelty that we knew we strike the right balance, even if it's just an event in a hotel. Of course, the catering, the hotel did an amazing job at the Leela with, providing really thoughtful and beautiful things. So anyway, of course, we're pushing that boundary as high as we possibly can. And events are by nature imperfect. And so we never know exactly how this is all going to come together, but through the group effort and the incredible team, everything that we do, that we push the boundaries, that's what it takes. And I think that's hopefully the cautionary, or the advice that we would give here to say, how are any other events that we would attend or see globally, how are they also invoking these things that are free, that are just, it takes time and energy, but it's all there for you. You just have to do it.
I think the last thing I'll say, because we're running up on time now, is like nothing works itself out. Everything has to be thought through. You may not be able to think it through year one, or if you're just new to events, but over a period of time, the expectations of audiences and people who are attending uh, increase, and so you have to think through every part of the experience. And so, what we've been talking about for the last, I guess, 40 minutes or so is that attend speaker experience. By focusing on speaker experience, you can actually have an effect on all the other parts of the experience as well, and why that matters. And so, if there's one takeaway from this, that would be my takeaway that I want people to take away is that speaker experience matters, and what is define the word experience and map out every part of it, and and then make sure that somebody's responsible in your organization for making sure uh, that they're where the buck stops. And so then they're able to deliver on whatever expectations you have from them. So in our company, that's a big part of, like, somebody is responsible for every part of the experience. If even if you've thought it out and nobody's responsible, guarantee 9 times out of 10 it will fall through. So this, Brian knows this very well. Unless somebody's responsible, it will fall through.
so have someone who focuses on speaker experience, the content the speaker is going to be presenting, and a little less on logistics.
No, logistics are equally important. It's the empathy of putting yourself in literally the speaker's shoes, the audience shoes, all of these things, walking them through their day, their experience, what you're creating, and making sure all of those details align. And yes, having your team help all be on the same page to execute that. It's all equally important. We're not saying the logistics are not important.
Yeah.
Those are
Well,
some of
we've
those are
talked
table
about
stakes.
the importance, like we've talked about the importance of conversation, and this has been a great conversation. If you want to leave the audience with one last takeaway, what would that be?
Read Skift Meetings. This is what we covered. This is the podcast that
Right.
you hear these insights on, the work that Andrea and Miguel and the team does on covering different parts of the industry thoughtfully, and honestly, like, we give a shit about this. That's why it all comes across. And so that's the one takeaway. Like, giving a shit is such a flippant line, but it basically defines everything.
And I think just be thoughtful. Try to be thoughtful in everything you do. If you sense the pattern, and the pattern is just, if it feels stale, just there's so many opportunities to just continually make subtle twists in the work that we do. And again, we're really excited about hearing from other people as well about saying, here's what they feel would be the most important thing, and then we continue to judge and work that into our editing for the future. So we're not the only people that do this. So it's certainly exciting that uh, we just want to see events be better overall. I think that's certainly something all of us can agree on.
And that's why I wrote a story about your LinkedIn post, Rafat. It was great that so many people offered their suggestions about how they focus on content, how they make their conferences better for the attendee. And that's what it's all about. So, yeah, we'd love to hear from our readers. And this has been great. I thank you both so much for your time.